Have you ever wondered whether the respect you give to others is truly returned? Or if a seemingly harmless action could completely change the way the world perceives you? Imagine you are a successful CEO, stepping into one of your own stores without anyone recognizing you. What would you expect from your employees? Would they treat you the same as any other customer? If this story makes you think, don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe so you don't miss the next ones. On a Saturday morning, Andrew Moore, CEO of a multi-million-dollar retail empire, sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel as he observed his store from a distance. The morning sunlight reflected off the glass storefront, casting sharp beams across the parking lot. A strange mixture of excitement and apprehension settled in his chest. This was the first store he had opened outside his home state, the place that could either mark the continuation of his success or the beginning of a downfall. But today, he wasn't Andrew Moore, the CEO. Today, he was just a man in a hoodie and jeans, walking in like any other customer. The feeling was unfamiliar. He had led this company for years, yet stepping into his own store felt like entering an unknown world, one where no one knew who he was. He wondered if things were still the way they used to be, if the values he had instilled in his company had truly taken root. Were the principles of respect and fairness for all customers still being upheld? His anticipation grew as he entered the store. This wasn't about overseeing operations as a CEO. It was about observing as a regular shopper. He needed to blend in, to see the business from an outsider's perspective. Moving through the aisles, he stopped at the home goods section, silently asking himself, were customers really receiving the care and attention he had envisioned? Were employees treating them like valued guests or merely as numbers to be processed? This was no simple test. How could he uncover the truth without revealing his identity? He wanted to understand, to feel the reality of the customer experience firsthand. If things were not as they should be, he knew it would be time to take action. With every step, his tension grew. He watched employees hurrying about their tasks. But was anyone truly engaged with the customers? Were they working with purpose or simply fulfilling a duty? Every interaction, every gesture carried a deeper significance to him. He wondered, did they realize that these small details made a massive difference in shaping the company's reputation and success? This visit, lasting only a few hours, would forever change the way he viewed his company, his employees, and, most importantly, the values he had worked so hard to build over the years. Andrew stood inside the store, taking in the scene with an unfamiliar feeling. He was no longer the prominent CEO of a retail empire, but just an ordinary customer, experiencing what others went through every day. The bright store lights gleamed off the shelves, and the lively chatter of shoppers surrounded him, making him feel as if he were just another face in the crowd. Yet, the stark contrast in how employees treated customers caught his attention immediately. As he picked up a Bluetooth speaker and made his way toward the checkout counter, he sensed something was off. A young employee near the electronics section stood idly, eyes glued to his phone, completely ignoring Andrew. He set the speaker down on the counter, expecting to be acknowledged like any other customer. But no, there was no greeting, no glance in his direction. The employee remained engrossed in his screen, oblivious to his presence. Andrew shifted slightly, hesitating. Was he being deliberately ignored? Clearing his throat, he spoke in a calm but clear voice. "Excuse me, could you help me?" The response was barely more than a shrug, as if Andrew had interrupted something more important. A wave of disappointment passed through him. He couldn't believe that in a company he had built on the foundation of customer respect and care, he was now witnessing such blatant neglect. He stood there, waiting for some sign of attentiveness, but nothing changed. no engagement, no courtesy. At that moment, his eyes wandered to another part of the store, where a completely different scene was unfolding. Near the clothing section, an older female employee was assisting an elderly customer. Her smile was warm, her attention unwavering. She patiently listened to the customer's needs, guiding them to the right size and even suggesting complimentary outfits. The genuine care in her demeanor was evident, and the customer responded with a bright smile, clearly satisfied with the service. The contrast was undeniable. Andrew couldn't help but feel a deep sense of disappointment. Why was there such an imbalance in how customers were treated? Why was he, just another shopper today, dismissed so easily, while others received attentive, thoughtful service? The lack of professionalism in some of his employees struck him deeply. How could a company survive if its core values of respect and customer service were being disregarded? Andrew realized that this wasn't just an isolated case, it was a systemic issue. If he, the very founder of this enterprise, could be treated with such indifference, how many other customers had faced the same experience? He took a slow, deep breath, knowing he couldn't ignore what he had just witnessed. This wasn't just a minor oversight, it was a fundamental flaw in the company's culture. And if he wanted to preserve the integrity of what he had built, he had to act. Walking away from the counter, his mind was already racing with solutions. Change was necessary, not just for the sake of the business, but for the very principles that had defined his vision from the start. After witnessing these unexpected events, Andrew could no longer remain a passive observer. Every step he took in this store, every interaction he observed among the employees, only reinforced one painful realization. This wasn't just a series of isolated incidents. The disappointment in his chest quickly turned into something deeper, a stark awareness that the problem ran far beyond a few disengaged workers. It was a reflection of a systemic issue embedded within the company's culture. Andrew stood still in the home goods aisle, the weight of his observations pressing heavily on his mind. Just moments ago, he had seen an employee attentively assisting an elderly customer, treating them with patience and warmth. Meanwhile, in the electronics section, he himself had been blatantly ignored. This wasn't just a coincidence. It exposed an underlying problem. The way employees determined which customers were worthy of their attention revealed a troubling lack of professionalism and respect, something Andrew simply could not accept. What was happening here? Was this a failure in training, or had the company unknowingly allowed a culture of complacency and selective service to take root? The more he saw, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about a few unmotivated employees. It was the result of a culture that had quietly evolved in the wrong direction, unnoticed until now. Everything Andrew had built, the core values of fairness and customer respect, the company principles he had so carefully instilled, seemed to have been gradually forgotten. The vision he once had, a business where every customer felt valued, where service was more than just a transaction, had somehow eroded into a cold, indifferent system. The attitude of disengaged employees didn't just reflect on them personally. It was a byproduct of an unchecked system, a lack of accountability, and a failure to uphold the very standards that had once defined his company. Once again, a question echoed in Andrew's mind. Had he grown too distant from his own business as it expanded? What seemed like minor service lapses had now revealed a serious operational flaw, one that Andrew could no longer ignore. The doubts swirling in his mind solidified into one undeniable truth. He needed to act, and he needed to act now. Andrew stood before Brian, the store manager, his mind filled with tension. Everything he had witnessed that morning, the lack of attentiveness, the dismissive attitudes of some employees, made it impossible for him to stay silent any longer. every detail from the way certain customers were ignored to the subtle but undeniable lack of respect, now stood clear before him like an unshakable reflection of reality. "Brian," Andrew began, his voice calm but firm, "I saw things today that I simply can't ignore." He paused, his sharp gaze fixed on the manager standing before him. "There's a clear disparity in how customers are being treated here. Some are given attention and care, while others are overlooked. And I'm not just talking about minor lapses in service, I'm talking about a fundamental issue of discrimination." Brian's shoulders tensed, his expression shifting between discomfort and unease. He tried to steady himself, but the truth in Andrew's words was undeniable. I wasn't aware this was happening, Mr. Moore," Brian replied, his voice careful, as if hoping to diffuse the situation. "I always strive to maintain a welcoming environment for our customers." Andrew didn't let the moment pass. He held Brian's gaze, his own eyes filled with disappointment. "I understand that every employee in this store plays a role, Brian, but this isn't just about a few individuals. This is about culture, a culture that has drifted away from its core values, where customers are no longer at the center of our service. They are not being treated equally." Brian looked down, silent. He knew Andrew was right. This wasn't the first time he had heard complaints, but today, with Andrew Moore himself standing before him, the issue had never felt more urgent. I don't know how to fix this," Brian admitted, the weight of the situation evident in his expression. Andrew exhaled slowly, clenching his fists briefly before relaxing them. "Brian, this isn't just one person's fault. This is a systemic issue, and if we don't change, we will fail. If we don't instill a culture of respect and fairness in every interaction, this will keep happening." His voice remained steady, carrying both authority and sincerity. He wasn't here to berate anyone. He was here to fix the problem. "Today, I didn't come to call out a few employees. I came here because I care about the future of this company. I need you and your team to help me create an environment where every customer feels valued, no matter who they are." The room grew heavier with the weight of his words. Brian nodded, finally realizing that this was a turning point. "I understand, Mr. Moore," he said, his tone softer now. "We'll do whatever it takes to make this right." Andrew felt the shift in the air. The problem wasn't solved, not yet, but at least the first step had been taken. He was no longer alone in this fight. As he walked out of the office, he knew he was about to open a new chapter for the company, one built on hope and determination. "Change starts now," he thought, "and I won't stop until it happens." As news of Andrew's secret visit to his own store spread, he never expected it would ignite such a powerful wave of change, not just within his company, but also in the broader community. Rumors of poor customer service began circulating, and suddenly, the name Andrew Moore was no longer synonymous with success. He could feel the shift in the air, the coldness in conversations where respect had once been unquestionable. Now, all he saw were doubtful glances and hesitant voices, as if people were questioning everything he had built. Despite his efforts to explain, every word he spoke seemed to add to the tension. Employees, once loyal and dedicated, now appeared distant, quietly observing rather than speaking up. Meetings in the office became increasingly strained, the warm camaraderie replaced by uneasy silences. Even the community itself seemed divided, uncertain whether Andrew could ever restore his reputation. His mind spiraled as he realized how deeply the values he had spent years cultivating had been shaken. What hurt the most wasn't the criticism from outsiders. It was the silent betrayal from those he had trusted. How could he rebuild the trust that had been shattered? How could he keep his company from collapsing under the weight of doubt? A pressing question lingered in his mind. Could he turn things around? He couldn't afford to stand by and watch his company fall into stagnation. Failure would not define him. Even amid the storm of scrutiny and rejection, he clung to a small flicker of hope. Every transformation begins with a difficult decision. "We can do better," he whispered to himself, steeling his resolve to face the challenge ahead with everything he had. As the scrutiny surrounding past management decisions intensified, Andrew felt a crushing weight on his chest. The decline in the company's reputation wasn't just a public relations nightmare, it was a direct threat to the foundation he had spent his life building. Investor meetings grew more tense, their confidence in him beginning to wane. He could see the change in the way people looked at him. Where there was once admiration, now there was skepticism. Smiles that used to be warm had turned cautious, as if his company's downfall was no longer a possibility, but an inevitability. The feeling of helplessness hit him like a tidal wave, making every previous effort seem meaningless. No one could deny that under Matthew's leadership, the community had responded with fierce momentum. Criticism was no longer just aimed at the company. It targeted the very principles Andrew had once believed to be unshakable. Was this the beginning of the end? Could he possibly pull his company back from the brink? Financial reports painted a grim reality, the red numbers flashing like an unforgiving warning. He felt the shift not only in the company's financial health, but also in his relationships with key partners. The backlash came in waves, critical articles, uncomfortable phone calls, and whispers of potential boycotts. Every morning, as he tried to focus on his work, the weight of incoming doubts and accusations pressed heavily upon him. The same questions repeated in his mind. Can this company recover? Can I regain the trust of my employees and the community? Yet, amidst the chaos, a faint glimmer of hope remained. Andrew knew that if he could rise above the storm, embrace transparency, and take decisive action, there was still a chance for recovery. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: only he could determine the future of his company. As Andrew Moore struggled with the fallout of his actions, the tense meetings, the rapid decline of his company's reputation, Matthew, the man Andrew had always seen as a competitor, unexpectedly emerged as a beacon of resilience. Matthew was no longer just a voice against workplace discrimination. He had become the symbol of change that both the company and the community desperately needed. His resistance wasn't about opposing an individual. It was a calculated, powerful movement to dismantle the unconscious biases that had long been ignored. And while Andrew found himself sinking under the weight of his failures, Matthew rose, strong, determined, a guiding light for those who had once felt unseen. Matthew's impact within the company extended far beyond policy changes. He revitalized the very culture of the workplace. He proved that success didn't require conformity, that true leadership meant advocating for those who had been overlooked. Through impassioned speeches and candid conversations with employees, he gradually won over even the most skeptical minds. He was no longer an outsider. He had become the voice of the future, a force that employees and the community rallied behind. Unexpectedly, while Andrew fought to mend the fractures within his company, Matthew had become the figurehead not just of the business, but of an entire movement, one that demanded fairness, one that refused to be silenced. The question remained: could Matthew sustain this momentum? And could Andrew find his way back from the shadows of his past mistakes? Only time would tell. Andrew sat alone in his office, the dim glow of his desk lamp casting long shadows over the unfinished documents before him. But tonight, everything felt different. He stared into the mirror on the wall, not to adjust his appearance, but to confront himself, to face the man he had become. The phone, once constantly ringing with calls from business partners, clients, and trusted colleagues, now sat silent. He had once prided himself on the empire he built, but looking at himself now, he felt something entirely different. Then, a painful realization struck him, one he had avoided for too long. The biases he had believed to be invisible had, in fact, always been there, shaping interactions, influencing decisions, and fostering an environment he had unknowingly allowed to persist. His visit to the store had been meant to reveal the truth, but now he understood that he had been blind to a much deeper problem. He could no longer ignore the way he had been treated in contrast to others, the words he overheard from employees in the home goods section, the subtle yet undeniable distinctions in service. His actions, though well-intentioned, had only highlighted the systemic flaws he had failed to see before. With a heavy heart, Andrew realized that he was not just a victim of the company's failings, he had been complicit in them. Regret settled deep within him, not just for the oversights, but for his inability to recognize the layers of inequality that had taken root under his leadership. A wave of guilt washed over him as he thought about every customer who had been disregarded, every person judged unfairly based on appearances, every unconscious bias he had unknowingly perpetuated. The collapse of his standing in the community now seemed inevitable. He questioned whether there was still time to make amends, or if his chance to correct the course had already passed. But as he stood up from his desk, a newfound determination replaced his despair. He could no longer hide from the truth. He had to confront it. He had to fix what was broken, not just within the company, but within himself. Most importantly, he had to learn how to see the world through a fairer, more just lens. One question echoed in his mind: can I regain the community's respect, or have I lost everything? Andrew stood before the mirror, staring into his own reflection, not as the accomplished CEO he had once seen himself as, but as a man who had spent far too much time avoiding the truth. He no longer saw the image of a powerful executive, but that of someone who had hidden behind numbers and dazzling marketing strategies while ignoring the real issues festering beneath the surface. A wave of guilt crashed over him as he thought about what had happened in his store, about the discrimination that had existed right before his eyes, yet had gone unnoticed. The more he thought, the more he realized he had lost something crucial. One of the core values he had built his company on, fairness and respect for all. He couldn't hide anymore. Things had spiraled beyond the point of no return. He saw failure, not just in his employees, but in himself, in the man who had once set standards, yet failed to ensure they were upheld. The system had rotted from within, and the worst part was that he hadn't recognized it until he had been forced to experience the pain of discrimination firsthand. As the boardroom doors swung open, echoes of voices long ignored filled his mind. These weren't just numbers and reports. They were people, individuals with emotions, needs, and a right to be heard. It dawned on him that no matter how vast his company grew, if he didn't face the truth, if he didn't take responsibility, change would never come. Andrew took a deep breath, stepping forward with newfound determination. This wasn't about fixing minor operational flaws. It was about dismantling the broken foundation of his company and restoring the values he had once championed. He called an emergency meeting, not to demand change from his employees, but to show them that he himself was ready to change. He knew this would not be easy, but Andrew understood that the first step toward real transformation was admitting the truth, acknowledging his mistakes, and committing to making them right. This wasn't just about improving customer service or boosting revenue. It was about rebuilding trust, a trust he had unknowingly allowed to erode. And now his journey to mend what was broken had to begin with himself. Andrew stood by his office window, the afternoon sunlight casting long shadows across his face, accentuating the lines of experience and contemplation. He had stood here countless times before, gazing out at the city skyline, reflecting on the empire he had built and the things he had overlooked. But today, everything felt different. He was no longer just a calculating leader, focused solely on revenue and strategy. He now understood that, above all else, respect and truth were the strongest pillars upon which a company must stand. Through this arduous journey, Andrew had confronted himself, recognizing the flaws and blind spots he had once ignored. But the most important realization of all was that no organization could truly change unless its leader was willing to change first. His company could not thrive in an environment where employees felt unheard, undervalued, and disrespected. If the very people who upheld the company's foundation were neglected, then no amount of financial success could compensate for the cultural bankruptcy within. Andrew had already taken the first steps toward making things right. He launched company-wide training programs on respect and equality, not just in one store, but across the entire organization. He held difficult conversations with managers, reminding them of the core values that had once defined the company. Meetings were no longer just about profit margins. They were about creating a workplace where every individual, regardless of their background, felt valued and respected. Mornings at the company took on a new purpose. Instead of simply reviewing reports, Andrew made it a priority to visit stores, engage with employees, and listen to their stories. He understood that leadership wasn't just about giving orders from behind a desk. It was about setting an example and being present in the change he wanted to see. With every step he took, his actions carried a clear message: real transformation starts from the top. Ultimately, Andrew grasped a truth that had once eluded him. Doing the right thing is rarely easy, but if he failed to act, his company would remain financially rich, yet morally bankrupt. Change wasn't an overnight leap, but a series of small yet steadfast steps, each one a part of a larger transformation. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow across his office, Andrew felt something he hadn't in a long time: hope. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but at least now he was heading in the right direction, toward respect, truth, and accountability. And that, he realized, was the most solid foundation upon which to build a better future. Andrew's story carries a powerful lesson about respect and responsibility in leadership. Success isn't measured solely by numbers and market dominance, but by the culture a company fosters and the way it treats its people. His journey highlights that true change doesn't come from strategy alone, but from a leader's willingness to listen, acknowledge mistakes, and take action. The lesson here is clear. Great leaders are not just skilled in business, but are also those who understand the true value of respect in the workplace. Real transformation begins with accountability, honesty, and the courage to build a company where every employee feels seen, heard, and valued. Thank you for watching. If you found this video interesting or enjoyable, please show your support by giving it a thumbs up. It really helps the channel grow and reach more amazing viewers like you. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on our future uploads. Your support means the world to us and keeps us motivated to create even better content for you.